So I don't want to put any words in your mouth. So do you want to make your basic argument around race and IQ? Can you sort of?
Absolutely not. No. Listen, I'll be very clear about this, because it's like saying, do you want to make your argument that the sun is the center of the solar system? It's like, well, it's not a personal thing. Like, this is not an idea I have come up with.
Okay, so not your idea.
It's not like my formulation, like I've got some beautiful mind set of like charts and lines in my basement. It's like, it's all about the price of magnesium, man. You know, I mean, so
I'm glad you countered with that, because in a way, my question accidentally was almost a setup. So I'll take that.
I mean, to give a very, very brief history of what it is, and for those who don't know where the science is. And I'm not a scientist, so people verify all of this. I've got a whole list of interviews with subject matter experts on the show about this topic. So listen to the experts. This is my amateur summation, just for those who want to know. So the U.S. Army, for over 100 years, has been giving more or less IQ tests to people to figure out whether they're sort of officer material or, grunt material, so to speak. And what they noticed was between blacks and whites, and this becomes this bichromatic nonsense, because the question of ethnicity and IQ is a whole layer cake. Just very briefly, the very top, the Ashkenazi Jews, this is the Jews that are the wandering Jews, so to speak. The Ashkenazi Jews.
You're sitting across from an Ashkenazi Jew. Can you feel the IQ just?
I actually am trying to hoover up some language skills from you. I'll do it later with a straw. But
I've been dumbing it down for you. So
I know, and I appreciate that.
As
a Caucasian, I really need to go slow.
Yeah.
I love lots of subtitles. Hand puppets help as well. So Ashkenazi Jews, as you know, and the science is like 115 IQ on average, but lower on spatial reasoning, and higher, like even higher than 115 IQ on verbal stuff, right? I mean, verbal acuity among Ashkenazi Jews is through the roof, and it's the highest recorded that there is. Some of how this fits with our general experience, I mean, what we're talking about, everybody kind of knows deep down. It's just that we don't have the scientific language or the mathematical language to describe it, and that's what we're trying to do. So, there's not a lot of famous Jewish architects or engineers, because Jews test an average around the hundreds in spatial reasoning, but crazy high on verbal acuity, verbal reasoning. So, of course, you would expect among novelists, among playwrights, among lawyers, where high verbal IQ is very important, going to find a lot of Ashkenazi Jews. And lo and behold, you do. So what that means is that, let's say Ashkenazi Jews, sort of 120, 125 verbal IQ, and there's a certain proportion of them in the language field, but it's not anything to do with Judaism, it's to do with IQ. And so what that means is that if you look at any group of people wherein they're in that IQ, they're going to be equally represented or proportioned. And then under that you have, I don't know, the word Orientals kind of come out of favor, which is kind of annoying in a way, because how do you differentiate people from India, people from sort of East Asians, whatever, the Chinese, Japanese, and so on. 103, 104, 105 IQ in general, very high on spatial reasoning, which is why, software engineers, other kinds of engineers, you see that, like Google has this, like, it's like 40% or something like that of their engineers are
not
East
much
Asian.
More, because after this diversity thing goes through, they're going to just have to pick everybody by color and all that nonsense.
But this is the thing, right? So if you're looking at East Asians with very high spatial IQ, they're going to be, quote, overrepresented in those engineering fields and so on, but not because everyone who's got that IQ is up there. There just happen to be more of those, right? You've got your run-of-the-mill vanilla Caucasians coming in at 100. And 100 is just, I don't know, it's just the baseline. They recalibrate it from time to time and so on. And then below, some of this, what are mestizos or Hispanic sometimes called, although that's a very loosey-goosey term, and that's sort of 85, 90, and so on. And then you've got blacks in North America, particularly African Americans, coming in at 85, and there's been some upward drift a little bit. And then below that, you start to get sub-Saharan blacks at 70. There are pygmies in the high 50s, low 60s. There are the indigenous people of Australia, I think, in the low 60s. And some of these numbers, again, I don't have them all tattooed on my wrist or anything. But so there is this range. It is unbelievably heartbreaking. I mean, just I'm straight up about all of this. Like, this is one of the most difficult facts I've ever had to absorb in my life. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of iterations as a thinker. You know, I was a Christian and a socialist and all. I mean, I won't go through a whole journey. But I found almost nothing harder to absorb than this question of differences in IQ between groups. And this goes back many, many decades. This was talked about by Herrnstein in Murray, of course, in the bell curve in 94. And nobody's been able to overturn that. And their basic argument is to say, look, blacks make less money than Ashkenazi Jews. But if you normalize by IQ, they don't. And this is, again, it's heartbreaking stuff, and it is so difficult to absorb this into your daily thinking. Because,
go ahead. Well, I just want to pause you for a second, because it's interesting you're describing it as heartbreaking and struggle, because that's what I was going to ask you, is that because you do talk about this stuff, I was going to ask you, are you troubled by it?
Oh, it's horrible.
Because I don't know that I've gotten that exactly through your videos, but I obviously haven't seen everything that you've done on this. So hearing you frame it in that way is actually different than a bit of the impression I had of you on this.
Oh, do you know how much I would give, Dave, to know that it was just racism? Because that's a solvable problem. And people have been working on trying to solve the problem of racism, well, for hundreds of years. I mean, it is, I mean, I wouldn't say I give my left arm because I'm left-handed, but I would give a lot.
Lefty too.
I would give so much for it to just be racism. So if you look at criminality, right? I mean, as you know, black males are, young black males, 3 to 4% of the American population responsible for more than 50% of the homicides. You look at what goes on in the South Side Chicago. It's horrible. And yet, in general, it is not, if you normalize by IQ, everybody who has an IQ of 85 has similar levels of criminality. Whites in America have a certain particular level of homicide that's pretty low. And whites around the whole world have the same level of homicide. Whites in England, whites in Belgium, whites in America, all have the same level of homicide. And the question, of course, is environment versus genetics. Mm-hmm. I would love to have a clear answer to that. Science is making its way forward, but it's such a volatile topic that a lot of scientists would rather do anything than delve into this particular topic. But it's extraordinarily heartbreaking, and it means to me that no amount of screams of racism can be guaranteed to solve the problem. And I think, isn't that what we've seen? That the consciousness about race and racism has gone up so enormously. And good, because there was definite racism in the world. Mm-hmm. But without this central fact, and it is a fact at the moment, even if we say it's 100% environmental, it's still a fact at the moment. Even if we say,
But is there evidence that it's genetic? Yes. I'm not a geneticist.
Yes.
So genetic in what regard? I mean, if we took the brain of a 25-year-old black man and the brain of a 25-year-old white man, what is it that they're doing that...
different sizes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is dependent on every ethnicity, the higher IQ. In general, there's lots of exceptions and so on. There are different sizes. There is evidence that if you take a white kid from a middle-class household, for whatever reason, ends up being raised by a black family, the white kid's going to end up about 100 IQ. If you take the average black kid, have them raised by an upper-class middle white family or a Jewish family and so on, they're going to end up at about 85. So it does not appear to be strongly environmental. I don't believe that there's no environmental causes. I've done lots of videos where I strongly urge the black community to breastfeed longer, to not hit their children, to do things that will give their kids the best shot at having higher IQs, because that's going to make a huge amount of difference in American society. And this is something that people need to talk about more, is the quality in black parenting, quality of black parenting around the world. But where in America the most could possibly be done is still quite low. They hit their kids the most, and if that can be improved, I mean, who knows what could change.
How far do you go down the rabbit hole of where all that starts? You know what I mean? That most black people in America, their ancestors were brought here as slaves, sure, that they didn't have equality for many hundreds of years, all of this. Yeah. And then end up in poorer neighborhoods, then they get stuck on the welfare system, and of course we're painting with sort of broad brushes here, of course. But that is the environmental factor, right?
Yes, and there's nobody who says, no sane person who says any human characteristic is 100% genetic. But again, and I would love to, I'm very keen on improving particularly childhoods. That's where I think the big thing is. But, you know, a couple of hundred years ago in Europe, people were like a foot shorter than they are now. And that was not genetics, that was environment. You know, not enough vitamin D, not enough nutrition as a whole, and backbreaking labor and starting in childhood and so on. And so even if we were to say it's 100% environmental, these are the issues that we have right now. So let's say that I could have been 7 feet tall, but I didn't get enough food as a kid. Okay, so that was environmental, but I'm still not 7 feet tall at the moment. Maybe my kids, it could be different and so on. But nobody knows how to improve it at the moment. That's the challenge. You know, you get this Head Start program. What do they pour? $100 billion into trying to close the black-white achievement gap, and with no effect. A few little bits at the beginning, and then it all generally tends to fade away. So it is something that it's a very difficult, unpleasant, challenging phenomenon when we have different IQs, and we haven't even talked about male-female, which again is a whole other challenge to sort of absorb and understand. But, you know, and it's funny because the left is always complaining about, and